Alan the lifeboat reached Shetland, the island group over 100 miles north of mainland Britain, mostly but not quite all under his own power, although that's a story from a recent episode. He's based here at the tiny but exceedingly welcoming marina on the island of Bresse, opposite the main port town of Lowick. It mostly caters to locals from the handful of minute villages on the sparsely populated island and their day boats and fishing vessels. This was the route in, through the gap in the rock pile breakwater, when Alan was escorted by kind local John, when we still had questions about the engine's state of obedience. But let's expand a little on my activities before I let you know how these final Alan episodes may look. There are a few ways to get to Aberdeen and thereafter to Shetland. Trains and planes for the mainland bit, via some smart parts of the UK. You can fly London to Shetland on one ticket, but it's wildly expensive, subject to weather delays, and baggage is limited. So I do the ferry for the other bit. The aforementioned means that I've had a few trips up and down since the last leg, and so have become familiar with the port city of Aberdeen. Despite contemporary grumbles that it's a somewhat boom and bust oil city, it boasts excellent historic buildings and lots to recommend it, including large seagulls. I passed by the commercial port and checked out the service and survey vessels, but ended up at the frankly brilliant and free of charge Maritime Museum. There's plenty of historic artefacts and well-explained exhibits, but there's also a nod to the North Sea oil field industry too, of course, and the crazy diving excitement that's necessary. For Arctic people like me, there's also a rusty chunk from one of the relief ships sent to search for the infamously tragic Franklin expedition. Here's the explainer. Pause the video for a proper read. The 4K resolution should be enough. I'm not reading the whole thing out for you, as I have a ferry to tell you about. You saw Nico and me on the opposite leg of this route last Alan episode, but I've grown more familiar as a proud veteran now of 4 return up and downs. The viewing deck as we leave Aberdeen is of course a must, and it was the best weather so far. I find large shipping of any sort ever impressive to take in at relatively close quarters. It's a sector of the working world that many people barely recognise the variety and scope of. And of course it was vital to tip my hypothetical cap at Alan's freefall cousin, suspended up there, just ready for his or her moment to courageously drop into the sea, save all those aboard from imminent doom, give them a sore back, and then induce nausea until help arrives. There's an even larger deck up top where there are fewer people smoking death sticks, a better view, and according to the winch symbol, presumably where a medevac helicopter would aim for. There's not a great deal more insightful nor deeply profound commentary that voiceover Alex can offer here, but I really like the footage, and I still do not believe in padding out YouTube videos with low-grade royalty-free music that gets you a copyright strike, even though you have a valid license to use it. So instead you've been able to enjoy the view of us passing the pier wall repairs, past the port control tower and lighthouses, and out to sea. Since cabins aboard are like hen's teeth, it's wise to stake a claim to the best parts of the seating areas. I choose the bow unless the sea is rough. The only difference between the two Northlink passenger ships is that a shower token gets you 5 minutes on one and 6 minutes on the other. I won't tell you which. Life's more fun with a gamble or two. There's the cinema, which is the best place to set up camp later unless some Alan books up the seats. The normal reserved seats are rubbish, let alone the so-called sleeping pods, so let's forget about that and look yonder. The sea between us and reunion with Alan diminishing by the second. But we're not in Shetland yet. That will take the full overnight voyage. Instead, we're popping into Kirkwall in Orkney, the island's much closer to Scotland, to drop some people off, collect some others, and then power on into the night. That happened. I enjoyed my quiet, dark sleeping spot I quote-unquote reserved, and then into Lowick we were. I hope that little travel log has readied you for some marina seawater majestically reflecting against the side of Alan's mighty hull. You'll see something is missing from Alan's stern. That's right, Alan's faithful dinghy, Alanson III, now has a proud new local owner. I've stuck with my policy of prioritising the quality of a home that Alan's key belongings go to, rather than chasing the final £50 I could potentially get. So Alanson III will have many Shetland adventures to come, and this does give me a quick opportunity to show you the foam-padded glass fibre supports I quickly installed in Wick. They meant the dinghy had good support from below when suspended aloft, and the straps didn't have to take all the strain. I suppose they can now act as foot supports for anyone wishing to ride Alan in the manner of a Scandinavian dog mushing team. I probably shouldn't encourage that. I'm not completing a strip out of the boat this episode, nor at all yet, as I'm unsure about how much needs to come out at this stage. Alan's next home is not certain. Instead, I'm making a start to open up space, and to remove structures that I'm 100% would have no value to a new owner. Unique and idiosyncratic Alan's layout and purpose was, of course. This racking and the marine plywood shelving was constructed right at the start of Alan's story. Indeed, the footage of friend and teammate James and I building the racking was very limited, as it was 6 months before I even considered a YouTube channel. It stood strong in the tests it was subjected to, supporting hundreds of kilos of fuel and supplies, and incurred zero corrosion issues. In fact, the galv box section looks exactly as it did, despite the stainless steel fixings. In hindsight, I may originally have been better off converting and extending the moulded fiberglass seating benches on the two sides into storage all the way up to the ceiling. Fuel tanks at the bottom and then lighter storage at the top. This would have left the central part of Alan's large cabin free for more ballast, more low-level storage, and then purpose-built central seating and tables or work surfaces on top of that. The plywood and box section quickly found a new home, and I'm now the proud new owner of many, many M10 size stainless nuts and bolts. Lucky me. We were doing well with the weather, but since Shetland gets whatever the Atlantic Ocean throws at it, it really is a 4 seasons in a day sort of place. The heat wave down south has not found its way up here. I did some more engine gremlins head scratching. You can see that there's a tiny wobble there, something new. Our guess is a dried out cutlass bearing at the propeller end. The engine is running at too high a pressure. Before, the gauge was running at about 5, just above 5 bar, and it's been like that all previously this year and also all of 2023. And although that's slightly higher than the manual says it should be at high revs, I thought that maybe that was just down to maybe a slight miscalibration of the gauge, or the sender wasn't sending quite the right numbers. But anyway, I considered that because they were stable was happy, and the engine otherwise seemed perfectly serviceable. Now, when we were running it, it was in the high 6s, around 7 bar. That is getting on towards double what the manual likes. And I've brought another gauge in to double check that it wasn't just my electric gauge making up numbers from scratch. It pretty much perfectly matches. It's still an electric gauge, but it's a different sort, and it runs on PSI, but I've converted the PSI to bar, and it does agree. So we were up around getting towards 90 PSI, which is it's just too high. That was only at idle though, where of course the pressure should have been lower, so I made sure Alan was sufficiently leashed and gave it some beans. The new temporary meter rose up over 90 PSI, about 6.3 bar, and now pulled out of sync with the other gauge, which had been around the mid-6s all the time. Bugger, we've still got more than 5 bar at idle, and then it's going up to above 6 when I apply any revs. Ah! Alan! So there are a number of reasons why this might be the case, apparently. Low pressure is of course a bigger problem than high pressure, but high pressure still means that your gaskets and seals can start getting angry at some point, and I don't want the top popping off the engine. So let's try and sort out the issue, starting with the most simple, which apparently might be that having checked that the oil levels are correct, which they are, the oil filter might just be a dodgy one. That's not to say that all of you who are saying that Baldwin have fantastic filters are wrong, but occasionally I guess a bad one might get through. So my first try will simply be to swap out the filter, which was changed across the time from when the pressure was good to now when the pressure was not good. So that might be possibly the reason, but we'll see. Beyond that, we might have to start looking at the electric sender, or possibly the pressure relief valve that's actually inside the engine itself. Well, it's accessible via a bolt, but I'm going to ask Michael, the mechanic, to come and show me how to do that, because that might be slightly beyond me and I risk taking something apart which I can't put back together again. Anyhow, what I can do is change the filter, and we'll hope for the best. You'll notice that the coolant temperature is now refusing to exceed 85 or 86 degrees. The system is working, and Alan's engine is apparently feeling much more like itself. My suspicion is that it's the pressure measurement that's off, either a sticky spring in the pressure relief valve or just an old tired unit, as it's the original the engine was shipped with. I've ordered a new genuine part from Book. It can't hurt anything apart from my bank balance. So that was enough staring at gauges, and I wondered about the now absent cooling issue. Well, I'm not often using the GoPro. Normally I use my little DJI action camera, but today we're going to go underwater. The DJI can go underwater, but not the battery pack, so I thought it would be simpler to use the GoPro. It was a Hero 9 today. Anyway, although I'm pretty sure we now have a good idea about what's going on with the engine and the temperature issues and the pressure issues, I thought it'd just be a good plan to have a quick look underwater and check that the keel coolers are free, just in case a bit of plastic or something's got wrapped around them, and that might be helping, helping the heat stay in the engine, which is exactly the opposite of what we want. Let's have a look and see what we think. One theory was that the keel cooler was disrupted from enjoying proper water flow and thereby unable to shed heat, but it's totally clear, although that doesn't mean that something didn't get snagged like a plastic bag and then get released later on. Unlikely though. Alan was able to bask in yet more excellent summertime in Shetland, and I continued to clear out the parts internally that I knew islanders, most of them boaters or otherwise of a practical rural mindset, could find a proper use for either afloat, on small holdings or at home. The clean water tank is a simple one to sort out. Electric pump and Cupro nickel standpipe out, and it's a good baffled 200 litre tank ready for service. Next to my electrics panel. It's been an evolution since the first layout I created in 2019, and of course today I'll have started it differently, but a lot of the subsequent work has actually been consolidation as my knowledge improved. Regardless, no future Alan Wrangler will want this setup as I did. The analog ammeters were low power drain decisions made when my teammates and I expected very limited power on the Dark Eyes project, where any unnecessary LED lights or displays were a waste of rationed power. And also the beautifully made reflex diesel heater, which I've actually never needed to light. Alan's excellent installation has seen to that, even in winter. This could stay aboard, I suppose, but that too had a keen local buyer, and it'll heat his workshop. That heater/stove had its own gravity-fed diesel fuel supply, with cut-off valve and fuel filter and water separator, so this ended up neatly back in the box too. Plenty remains on board, and I'll make more decisions as discussions with future custodians of the large orange lump develop, and I get a sense of his future life. I'll say something mildly interesting about the deinstallation of loads and loads of stuff without falling over, and that's that actually, as I've been taking things off, it's brought back some really good memories of the time when I've fought and thought and had to really push myself in terms of research and technical skill and all sorts of things to actually put things onto the boat. And so yeah, it's been a not a necessarily negative nostalgic trip for me. Alan will remain at this mooring for some time yet, whilst I negotiate some land-based refuge for him, which, whilst no more or less secure, is cheaper and gets the hull out of the seawater. This was during a very limited time window when wind gusts were not too much for my drone, so we did a little flying as yet another cruise ship disappeared off south to its next port. I've never understood the appeal, and maybe that's for the best. The flight does conveniently allow me to masterfully illustrate that I briefly headed over to the main island for a few hours. There we see a, not at all authentic I hasten to add, smallish Norse-style boat, but in the ever-busy visitor marina also the permanent mooring for the mighty offshore boat who had towed us in days before. Back to Alan to lift up and put down some fuel containers and to sign off. Well, that was my exercise for the day, moving quite a lot of fuel. That's a good few hundred litres of fresh, clean diesel. A friend will have more use for that than I will. Something that's been novel and deeply pleasant over the past weeks after the decision to halt Alan's march north here is a moment to sit. For 2 or 3 years, every day earmarked as Alan time, both on and off the water, and the hundreds of hours of research that accompanied has been frenetic. Most days eating lunch only as snacks on the move and often finishing work past midnight. So to sit atop Alan like this meant something. Don't worry, my drive is undimmed, and I shall not take the work ethic of this very relaxed inhabitant of the marina. In fact, in the next Alan episode there's much more fun close-up footage of these charmers. But enough for now. Back on the ferry to Aberdeen, of course, and home. Next time, Alan goes on the move, under his own power once more. Cheers all, and do please remember to buy my books as they make you a better and more rounded human being. I've not plugged those in a while, and if you're one of the thousands who have already, please do leave a review online. It helps. Bye.